Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Good morning, sir.
Morning. Yes.
Yeah. My screen is also visible to all of you, right?
Yes, it is.
Right.
Okay. So today we are going to complete our multi-threading concept, right? Let me open the course syllabus. Right. So we have discussed what is multi-threading. We have discussed the thread class in details. We have already discussed how to pass data to a thread function and how to retrieve data from a thread function. We have discussed each elif and this join method. We have discussed what is thread synchronization. We have discussed different classes available to implement thread synchronization. We have already discussed what is deadlock and how to prevent deadlock. Performance testing of a multi-threaded application, that is also we have discussed. We have already discussed what is thread pooling, right? What are foreground and background threads, what is the life cycle of a thread, and what is the prioritize of a thread. And we concluded thread prioritize is useless because even though we have set the priority of a thread, that is not going to be executed, right? And today we are going to discuss these three concepts: how to terminate a thread, inter-thread communication, and how to debug a multi-threaded application, right? Inter-thread communication we have already discussed in our monitor class, because in that example we have shown you how to we make use of a monitor class false and wait method for inter-thread communication. Even though that is again I'm going to discuss today, right? So today basically I'm targeting these three concepts, and with these three concepts our multi-threading is going to be completed. And from the tomorrow class onward we'll start our most important concept in C# that is collection, and it's a very big one. At least 1 or 2 it will take to complete the concepts, right? So let's start today's discussion. So how to terminate a thread? So suppose you are executing the thread, right? And after executing the thread, after 2 seconds or after 5 seconds, right? Or after 200 milliseconds or after 500 milliseconds, you want that thread to be terminated. You don't want that thread to be executed anymore, right? Or it's a situation like that, okay, if the thread is taking more time and you want that thread to be terminated. So if you want to terminate the thread, right, then how to do this? Right. First of all, one of the option is once the thread execution completed, then the thread will be terminated automatically. If the thread execution is not completed, but if you want to terminate the thread manually, then what you will do and how you will do, right? That is what we are going to discuss today. A thread can be terminated by calling the abort method of the thread instance, right? The abort method of the thread class will throw thread abort exception to the thread in which it is called. Due to this exception, the thread is terminated, right? For example, right? Suppose you created one class object, okay, thread of each. Okay, let me first create one method, right? Static void some method. Static void some method, right? And here you are creating one thread instance. This thread instance, what you are passing this method, right? And okay, let me do one thing. Thread dot let me slip this thread for, right? Okay, let me use the other overloaded version. What is the other overloaded time span dot from seconds? I'm making this thread to slip for 10 seconds. So once you invoke this method obj.start, this thread will be start its execution. Yes or no? This thread will start its execution. And this thread, right? This thread, which okay, let me give this thread name as thread one. Okay, and this thread one will be terminated only when this method execution completed, right? Yes or no? Because as long as this thread is not completed its execution, so in it will be even though your main thread completed execution, it is going to still complete the execution of this method. And once the execution of this method completed, then only this thread will be terminated. Why? Because this is a which kind of a thread? Background thread or foreground thread? Guys,
Foreground.
Foreground thread means what? Even though your main thread is completed, right? The foreground thread means it is guaranteed to be guaranteed to complete the execution of the method, which is called by the thread, right? But at some time, right, after 5 milliseconds, you want the thread to be terminated, right? So what you are trying to do is you are making this main thread to be wait for 5 seconds, right? You are making this thread to be wait for 5 seconds, right? Or you can also use other overloaded thread dot join, which one is taking milliseconds time, right? From okay, you can also use this one times one dot from seconds, right? If in 5 seconds it is completed, that is fine, right? And if you go to this overloaded version, then you will see that it is returning a Boolean parameter, right? Boolean parameter means it will return true if the method execution is completed in 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, if the method execution is not completed, what you want to do is you want to terminate the execution of this thread. How you will do this? Thread dot abort method. Thread dot abort method. And when you call this abort method, then the process, right? Then the CLR will start terminating the thread which is currently executing, right? So start terminating in the sense this thread one will terminate, right? This thread one is executing this some method. That means this is some method execution is going to be terminate, right? And when you terminate this method, right? Then if you want to see, so it is going to throw some exception, and if you want to see that exception, right, so this is the called method, right? So here you can see console dot write line, right? So the thread terminated exception message you will see here, right? That message you will see here. And if you want to use another version where you want to send your own message, then you can send here. So here I am terminating the thread. So so in this case, I'm passing a string object parameter to this abort method, and that message you will see here. That means what? Now, if you want to terminate any thread in your .NET application, right? Terminate in the sense manually, right? Abnormally, if you want to terminate, then you have two options. One is abort method, and another is also other overloaded version of the abort method, which is taking an object as a parameter. Even though you can also directly call this terminate method here without see, you don't want this method to be wait for 5 seconds. As soon as method thread start, you just want to terminate the thread. Yes, that is possible. You have to call like this. Now, if you go to the definition of this thread class, then you will definitely see there are two overloaded versions of the abort method. Yes or no? One abort method doesn't take any parameter. Another abort method take one object state info parameter. That means this state info will provide the information about the aborted thread. Why you are aborting the thread? What is the reason of aborting the thread, right? Any information you want, you can pass as a parameter to this abort method. That is the second overloaded version I'm showing here. Clear, guys? We'll see every kind of example, how to call terminate a thread by without starting the thread, how to terminate a dead thread, how to terminate a running state. All these things we are going to discuss. If I am calling if I'm calling the abort method without starting the thread, then what will happen, right? Everything we are going to discuss, but for now, you just remember how to terminate a thread means you need to call the abort method on the thread class instance. And there are two overloaded versions of the abort method. One is without parameter and another one is taking one object parameter. So you can pass any value. This is the two approaches, or this is the two overloaded version that is available in the thread class to terminate a thread. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is the definition. And you can see if the abort method is called a thread, before calling the start method on it, calling the start method on the set later on will not start it, but it will throw thread start exception. That means in this case, right? In this case, if you look at this example, right? What I'm trying to do is I'm calling the start method. I'm not calling the start method, but if I'm calling the abort method, then in that case, it will throw me thread start exception. We'll discuss all these things practically. There are two overloaded versions. One is without taking up parameter, another one is object parameter, right? Now let us understand this concept with multiple examples, right? So in this case, you can say this is my sum method, which is running for 3 times, right? The loop is here, and this loop is going to be executed for 3 times. What I'm trying to do is, I'm calling this method, right? Thread start. I'm creating an instance of a thread. I'm passing this sum method as a parameter. I start the thread, and then I'm writing this message that the thread is abort, and then I'm calling the abort method, right? So as soon as I call this abort method, then you will see that the method is going to be aborted, and whatever statement you have written, this is not going to be printed, and that is what. So in this case, I'm not checking whether the thread is completed in some time or not. Nothing is checked. Simply I'm calling the abort. So the thread is abort. Now let me do one thing here. I'm using this as a 5 seconds, right? After printing the value, what I'm making this thread to sleep for 1 second, right? And the thread is going to be abort, and what I'm trying to do is I'm writing this statement: if thread dot join method, right, within 200 milliseconds, if the thread complete its execution, that is fine. Otherwise, just print this statement: thread is aborted, right? Why it is printing the value? Can anybody tell me why it is printing the value?
Would you repeat the question?
Yes. I'm making this the main thread to wait for 200 milliseconds, and if it is not, in this case, within 200 milliseconds, is this thread is going to return me true or false? Guys, tell me the answer. Thread dot join, in this case, is going to
return true.
it's written true or false. So within 200 milliseconds, this method is going to be completed or not? So see, this loop is going to execute for 5 times. Each time I'm making the thread to sleep for 1000 milliseconds. That means at least this
Also,
method
it's gonna be false.
more than 500 5000 millisecond or not?
Yes.
Within and here I'm writing thread.join 200. That means within 200 millisecond is the method. Is this method complete its execution? No. So in that
No.
case, it is going to return me false. So if it is going to return me false, is this statement is going to be executed?
No, no,
Yes.
it's like 2
No.
more seconds.
It
2
is
more
not
seconds.
going to be executed. So what I need to
Yeah,
do
yes.
to make our method to be work, so we can use this not equal operator. Is that clear?
Yes. Oh, can we just make the some method sleep for longer and it should work too?
So this method at least going to take 5 seconds. And what we are writing here is if okay, so to make these things work, so what I can do is I'm using the author overloaded method, right? So within 2 seconds, if the method not completed, then return false. So here I'm writing time span dot from seconds, and I'm passing 1 second. So each time the loop execute, it will sleep for 1 second, and this loop is execute for 5 times. That means at least the method is going to take 5 seconds. More than 5 seconds, 100%. Because each time the loop execute, it will sleep for 1 second. That means 5 time loop is execute. That means this method is sleeper or this thread is sleeper at least 5 seconds or not. Within that means, and within 2 seconds, this method 100% not going to be completed. That means this thread, the join method is going to return me false, and it is returning false. I'm using this not equal operator, so it will convert that false to true, and in that case, this statement is going to be executed. Right? So let me run the application. Got it? Now we are getting the output expected or not. So 2 times thread is execute, and then this join method return me false, and I'm converting that to true by using the not equal operator, and then I'm aborting the thread. So once I abort the thread, then you can see no further execution is happening via inside the sum method. Clear or doubt?
Clear. Thank you.
Yeah. So sometimes you need to understand why it is not happening. See, if I'm writing this statement, this is a syntactically this is correct, right? But what is mistake? The logic what we have implemented is wrong. So sometimes these things you need to check, right? So this is how the abort method is executed. Now, execute abort state object method of thread class. So we have seen there are 2 other overloaded versions, 2 overloaded version of the abort method. This is the abort method which is not taking any parameter. Now I'm going to use another abort method which is taking parameter of object type, right? So in this case, you can see I'm creating one thread. Let's say this thread is thread 1. I'm starting the thread. I'm making the main thread to sleep for, in this case, which thread is going to sleep for 1000 milliseconds? Your thread 1 or main thread?
Third one.
Sorry,
It's a
thread
main
1.
thread.
It should be main thread, right? Main thread will sleep for 1 second, right? And then I'm aborting the thread, and in this case I'm passing some value 100. So as you can see, this method is taking one parameter of object data type, and we know object is the superclass of all .NET data type. So any value you can pass to that object parameter, right? I'm calling this abort method, and this I'm calling this join method, right? Waiting for the thread to terminate, and then I'm printing the statement main thread is terminating. And if you come to this sum method, right, you can see the thread is started, right? It is showing the thread is starting. And here I'm using a simple loop or j equals to 1, j less than 100, j plus plus. And I'm just writing this statement. If j is modulus division by 10 equals to 0, then it is simply printing the next line and making the thread to sleep for some milliseconds, right? And then once this for loop execution completed, this statement is going to print, right? But while this method is executing, while this statement is executing for loop, right? And if I abort the thread, right, by passing some value, then in that case, it will throw one exception, right? It will throw one exception. If you are handling that exception means what? The catch block is going to be in this case, what type of exception it is going to throw? It is going to throw thread aborted exception, right? Thread abort exception. If you are not sure which type of exception it is going to throw, simply you can replace this with the super class, right? Who is the super class of all exception classes? Exception class. You can simply write like this. So in this case, you can see exception state. Right? I'm writing ex dot message, right? So in this case, let me run the application and show you the output. Right? So abort thread one. See, I'm making this loop to execute for 1 to 100, right? But each time the loop once after printing the 10 numbers, the thread will sleep for 200 milliseconds, right? That means once it executes the 5 times, right? Up to 50, that means 1 second it is in the sleeping mode, right? And we are only making the main thread to sleep for 100 seconds, 1 second. After the this abort thread one is started, then it is calling the abort method by passing the value 100, right? Then it is just calling the thread.join method so that we can see the thread execution completed. This statement is printed. After then you can see thread one is uploaded and the code is thread was being uploaded. And in this case, I'm just printing the main thread is terminated, right? But in this case, there is a problem. What is the problem? Here we are passing 100, but that value is not printed here, right? That value is not printed here. If you want to print that value, right, then what you need to do is you need to use this thread start exception. And you need to use what is the exception state. What is the exception state? Yeah, anything else? Yeah, exception state. So in this case, that 100 will be printed here. Yeah, 100 is printed. Instead of 100, you can pass any value. I'm terminating the thread simply. Now you will see that I'm terminating the thread is going to be printed, right? And if you want to print the message, right, then you can also print the message of why this thread is going to be terminated. How? Now by using the ex start message property. Because this message property is available in the thread class and that is also available to the child ThreadAbortException class. See, the code is I'm terminating the thread, message is thread was being uploaded. So when the thread was aborted, right, by calling the abort method, then it will throw one exception. And if you want to handle that exception, then you need to put the code, right, what you are executing using that thread inside a try block, and you need to handle that exception in the catch block. Any question from anyone? Guys?
No.
Okay, so it's very simple, right? And in this case, guys, you can see I'm calling the abort method, right? I'm calling this abort method after starting, right? Once the thread is in running mode, right? Then I'm calling the abort method. Now we will going further and we'll try to understand the other scenario. So one of the scenario is calling the abort method on a thread that has not started yet. So in this case, what you will get thread start exception, right? If the thread is not yet started, and if you are calling the abort method, then you will get some thread start exception. This is the simple some method. It's saying that thread has
this thread has started its execution. This is a simple for loop, right? Which is simply printing the I value each time the for loop execute, it sleep for 1 second, right? Then it's printing the statement saying the execution has finished, the thread has finished its execution, right? If any exception occurred, we are just printing that exception detail inside the catch block. This is the sum method. But now what I'm trying to do is, so in this case, once the thread is executing, right? Once the thread is executing, if you are calling the abort method, then what method the thread is executing, in that method it will throw the exception and you can catch the exception. But the thing is different now. What is different? In this case, I'm just creating the thread instance which is pointing to some method. But do I have called the start method? Am I call this start method? Am I call this start method? This start method is not called, right? If this start method is not called, does this method execution started? Guys, is this
No.
method execution started?
No, sir.
No, because why? See, by default, whenever you create a thread, right? The thread is in which state? On started state only. Yes or no? When you call the start method, then it will move to running state. From running, it will move to runnable state, and from runnable state, it will move to running state, right? But in this case, we are not calling the start method. We have not called the start method. We have not called the start method means the thread is not yet started. The thread is not yet started means this method execution has not been started. And if the thread is not running, right, that means it is on started state. And when you call the abort method on a thread which is not started, then in that case you will get one exception called thread start exception. And in this case, that thread start exception you will not get here because this method has not been yet started. Rather, on the calling thread you will get this exception. Calling thread means the thread which is calling this abort method, right? So the calling thread in the sense this main method, right? In this case, who is creating this thread? Main thread is creating this thread. Who is calling this abort method of the child thread class? Main thread is calling this now because whatever execution happening inside this main method is going to be taken care by which thread? Main thread or this child thread? Which thread is going to do all these activities inside your main method? Guys,
The main thread.
main thread. That means
Yes,
in this
main
case,
thread, sir.
yes, in this case, the calling thread is nothing but your main thread. So in this case, when you call the abort method, right, it will throw thread start exception to your calling thread. So in this case, your calling thread is not nothing but your main method. That means you have to handle that exception inside the main thread only, right? Because the child thread is not yet started. So in this case, you can see it is going to give you the exception that thread has not been yet started, right? And this method will never come into the picture because we are not calling the start method. Now let's run the application and see the output. See, thread start exception, thread failed to start, right? You are trying to terminate the thread, but the thread is not yet started, right? So it's something like this. You are, I mean, you have not started the thread and you are calling the thread, you are terminating the thread. First of all, if you want to terminate, first of all, you need to start. The thread should be in the running state. Once the thread is in running state, then only you can stop the thread. If the thread is not yet started, then how you can stop that thread? Right? So if you are trying to stop the thread without starting it, then you will get this thread start exception, right? So further, and if you go to if you do not know what kind of exception class instance it is going to throw me, simply you can use the parent exception class, right? So in the parent exception class, you will see again the same message. That message is thread start exception occurred, message thread failed to start, right? Any question from anyone? Why we are getting the exception now in this try block, not inside the sum method? guys?
No question.
Okay, right. Right now, so we have seen the thread which we are calling, right? We are calling the abort method or running thread. We have seen the example of calling the abort method on the thread which has not been yet started. Now we are going to see the example of calling the abort method on the blocked thread, right? If the thread is blocked and if you are calling the abort method, then what will happen, right? So let me show you. See, when we call the abort method on a thread which has started its execution, but presently it is in either of the block state. Block state means it is either in the waiting state, sleep state, or join state, right? It will first interrupt the thread and then abort it by throwing thread abort exception, right? So in this case, so what will happen? First of all, it will interrupt, it will stop the thread execution, then it will throw the exception. Okay, let me show you with one example. This is the same method, no need to explain this method anymore because in this case, this logic we have already discussed many times, right? So simply thread started, simple for loop, which is executed for 3 times. Each time we call this loop, the thread is going to be sleep for 3 seconds, right? If the execution completed normally, this statement is going to be executed. If the execution terminated abnormally, I mean, if there is some exception, I mean, exactly if thread abort exception is raised, then this statement is going to be printed, right? Then what I'm trying to do is, in this case, thread is started, right? In this case, thread is started. That means we do not get any exception. We will not get that thread start exception here, right? Because the thread is already started. That means if we are calling the thread abort method, right? In this case, the exception will be raised inside the sum method, right? And in this case, you can see I just make this thread start. I'm making the main thread sleep for 500 milliseconds, right? Why I'm making this thread to sleep for 500 milliseconds? Because I want to make sure, I want to give guarantee that this thread execution is happening, right? This thread execution has been started. And to make sure, what I'm trying to do is, after calling the start method, I'm making the main thread to sleep for 500 milliseconds. So once the main thread sleeps for 500 milliseconds, then there is a guarantee, right? 99% time, this child thread is going to start its execution, right? Once the child thread start its execution of first time, the thread enter inside the loop. So how many seconds this thread is going to be sleep? 3 seconds. This thread is going to be sleep. And then what I'm trying to do is I'm immediately calling the abort method. That means once the execution happened, this thread, right? Once the execution started, this method execution, right? The thread will be there in sleep mode for 3 seconds, right? The thread is in sleep mode means what? The thread is in blocked mode, right? The thread is blocked for 3 seconds, right? Within these 3 seconds, I'm calling this abort method. That means what? I'm calling a thread. I'm aborting a thread which is in blocked state. Is that clear, guys?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank
And then once I call this abort method, then you will see that the exception what we are right, the thread aborted exception message you will get here, right? Now and here I'm writing the join method which will make sure that once the thread is aborted, right, completely, then this main thread has terminated statement will be printed on the console, right? Let's see. See, my thread has started its execution. My thread is printing 0. Printing 0 means this statement is printed. And after printing this statement, the thread is asleep for 3 seconds. Means thread is in blocked state, right? And immediately after that, I'm calling this abort method. That means the blocked thread is going to be aborted, and the message you can see the thread was being aborted, right? And after the thread terminated, right? Once this execution completed, then it will come to this statement, right? And then it is going to print this main thread has been terminated. Is that clear? Guys, clear or
Yeah.
not? Yeah. So basically we have seen the example, uh, calling the abort method on the running state, calling the abort method on a thread which has not been started yet, and calling the abort method on the block thread. Block thread in the sense it might be your sleep method, right? You are calling the sleep method, you are calling the wait method, or you are calling the join method. So in that case, again, the thread is going to be terminated, right? In that case, what you will do, see, in this case, the thread is sleep means it will make the thread to leave, right? And then it will going to terminate the thread. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. Any question from anyone related to this, how to terminate the thread in .NET Framework? Okay. The next important concept what we are going to discuss is how to debug a multi-threaded application. It is very important, right? Without understanding this, you cannot debug a multi-threaded application. Let me directly give you one example. So this is a some method, right? This is the sum method which is going to be executed by two different threads, thread 1 and thread 2. When I'm calling this when I'm calling this start method, right, the thread 1 is going to execute, again thread 2 is going to execute, right? Let me run the application in debug mode. How to run the application in debug mode means you just need to put the debugger point. So by clicking on here, it will put the debugger point, right? I'm running the application here by clicking on the start button. Now the method execution started. Currently the I value is 0. Okay, so let me press F10. I value become 1, right? Now I value become 1. Can anybody tell me currently this I value 1 is for which thread? Thread 1 or thread 2? Can anybody tell me?
I'm
Should be
sorry.
thread 1, which is the one you started.
Sorry?
Should be thread 1, the one you started.
Both thread are started. Now we are calling the start method on thread 1 as well as thread 2.
Yeah, but first you call thread 1.
So if I'm calling the thread 1, do you think that after thread 1 completely
They
completed the
both would run
execution,
simultaneously. No,
they
you
run
said a joint. They both
they
would
run
run simultaneously.
simultaneously now? So if they are running simultaneously, if they are running one by one, then you can predict. But they are running simultaneously, concurrently they are running, right? Can you predict currently which thread is debugging this sum method?
No.
You guys, you are understanding my point now. So in this case, both the thread are running simultaneously. So as both thread are running simultaneously, and when I'm debugging my application code, then we can simply predict that which thread is currently executing my application code. If you want to know which thread is currently executing your application code, then what you need to do, you need to click on the debug, you need to click on the Windows, and you need to go to the thread, right? If you click on this Windows debug thread, right, you can see currently how many threads are running your application code. How many threads?
3 threads.
Three threads. A main threads, worker, two threads.
Okay, this is
No,
the
three
main
threads.
thread which is by default provided by operating system, and two worker threads, or you can say this worker thread, it might be a foreground thread or it might be a background thread, but these are going to be worker threads only, right? These threads are created in our application, but this main thread is not created in our application. So two main threads. So currently the process ID, you can see process ID for this worker thread is this one, and for this one, right? But the problem is, and you can see both the thread are executing the same sum method, and this main thread is executing the program.main method, and other two threads is executing program.sum method. But we cannot predict which thread is this one and which thread is this one, right? So what I can do is we can provide some custom name. So you just guys tell me how to provide a name to a thread. By using the which property we can set the thread name? There is a property called name. Yes or no? So what I'm making this as my thread 1, right? And then I'm making this as thread 2, right? Now what I'm doing, I'm making 2 threads. So this is my thread name is thread 1, and this thread name is thread 2, right? Now run the application. Once you run the application, right, and then go to the debug, then go to Windows, debug, Windows, then threads, right? And you can see the thread 1 is, this is thread 2, this is thread 1. Currently, which thread is debugging?
Thread
Thread
2.
1, thread 2. Thread 2 means if from
Thread
here,
2 is debugging right now. Thread 2.
right? So what you can do is, okay, let me click F5 button, right? Again, once I click this continue button, you can see now the debugger point is here, right? Now the debugger point again here, but this time, so you can see this arrow symbol, right? This arrow symbol indicates which thread is currently executing. This arrow symbol pointing to this thread, right? And this thread name is thread 1. That means currently the debugger is debugging the thread 1. Let's click once more. Now it is debugging thread 2. Click once more. So in this way, you can predict which thread is currently executing your application code, right? And by using that name property, you can simply predict which thread is currently executing my application code. Is that clear?
Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
you have to put the breakpoint here, and then you need to use this debug window thread option, right? And this is working fine, right? But the point that you need to remember, guys, is once you are running your application in debugging mode, right? Once one thread hit the breakpoint, other thread at the same time, they cannot execute concurrently, right? So in this example, right? In this example, as you can see, I'm putting the debugger point. Debugger point means my application is halt at this point only. Give me 1 minute, guys. So guys, you need to remember the thing is that currently, how many threads are running our application code?
3 threads. So
3 threads. So when you are debugging your application, right? If you are debugging your multi-threaded, so this is a multi-threaded application, right? In this case, say if it is a single thread application, then once you hit the debugger point, do you think that other statements are going to be executed automatically? No. So the same process, the same thing is here also. If you are running your application, if you are running your multi-threaded application in the debugging mode, right? Once one thread and you are seeing that this thread, that is thread 1, is currently I'm debugging, then at that time, this thread 1, this thread 2 and main thread, they are going to be in halt mode. They cannot execute concurrently. This is the point that you need to remember, right? If your thread 1 is debugging, that means main thread and thread 2, they are in the pause mode. They are in the halt mode, right? And guys, one more thing, right? Suppose you are debugging this one and you want to debug this thread. So simply select this and double click this, right? Suppose you want to change the debugging option. Currently, you can see this thread is running, thread 2, and you want to debug thread 3 only. Select thread 3, right? And then double click. Once you double click, you can see this arrow symbol is moved from other to this thread. Understand this or not? Now, if you debug, then this thread is going to be debug your application code. Clear?
Yes, clear.
Okay. Now another thing is how to debug a specific thread in C#, right? So you can see currently my application having 2 threads. I'm interested only this worker, this thread 2. I only want to debug thread 2. I don't want to debug this thread 1. So what you can do is, right? So you can select this one, double click. So debugger point is on thread 2, and you don't want to debug this thread 1. Simply what you can do is right click here, and here you can see two options, freeze and thaw, right? Once you select the freeze option, that means this thread is going to be out of the debugging mode, right? Once you click on the freeze option, the thread is going to be out of the debugging mode. And when you click on this freeze mode, okay, let me click on the freeze. So you can see this symbol is coming, right? You can see this pause symbol is coming, which means what? Which means now you cannot debug this thread, right? Every time you click on the button, you will see that, right? You will see that the thread is going to be debugged. This one, this thread is not going to be debugged because it is in pause mode, right? So if you want to debug a specific thread, then you have to select other thread, right click on the thread and select the freeze button. Now after some time you again want to debug this thread, then how you will do this? Right click, and there is an option called a thaw. So once you click on the thaw option, right, then again this thread will come into the debugging mode, right? I click on the thaw option, right? And once I click on the thaw option, then if I click on the continue button, right? Execution completed, right? You can see that option is gone, and now you select, double click, the thread will be come into the debugging mode. So basically there are two options. One is thaw and one is freeze, right? When by default, when a thread is created, they are created by using this thaw option. So you can see this option is not clickable at this point, right? Because this option is currently selected. But if you want to freeze the thread, then you can click on this freeze option. And once you click on the freeze option, right, the thread will be stopped from debugging. Again, if you want, then once you click on the freeze option, the thread is the thread is unable to debug. But again, if you want to debug, now you can see the thaw option is available. You can click and the thread will come into the debugging mode. So there are two options. One is freeze and thaw, right? And by using those two options, you can debug a specific thread in your application. Is that clear? Guys?
Yes, thank you.
Right? So this is very simple, and this is the thing that you need to understand, because if you are not using this name of the thread, and if you do not know how to use this debug windows and the threads option, right, then you cannot understand the thread, right, which is currently executing your application code. And even this is also important if you want to debug a specific thread on your application. If you are interested only to debug the method by using thread 1, then you need to make the thread 2 as a freeze. And if you want to debug only thread 2, then you need to freeze thread 1, right? Because this two thread is going to execute your sum method. No need to freeze this main method, because main method is not going to execute your sum method. Clear? Guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now we are going to discuss another important concept. That is what I'm showing here. Freeze, pause button, thread is freeze, and you can use this thaw or button, right? What is debugger point with condition? Sometimes you want to debug specifics. Specific means what? Now in our example, when we run the application in debug mode, sometimes it will halt thread 2 if thread 1 is debugging, or it will halt thread 1 if thread 2 is debugging, right? See, in this case, right, suppose I run this application, right? I run this application. In this application, you can see if I'm debugging thread 1, right, thread 2 and main thread is going in the halt mode. Yes or no? Yes or no? this I'm debugging thread 1 means thread 2 is in halt mode, right? He is not halt mode in the sense what? The halt mode in the sense the thread cannot continue its execution. So what is my requirement is, my requirement is I am only going to execute thread 1 in the debug mode, but concurrently thread 2 should be executed but not in the debugging mode. Understand my point? There are two
Want
threads,
to pass it.
right? Or there are two threads. I'm going to execute the some method using thread 1 in the debugging mode. But if I'm using this option what I'm showing you right now, using this one, right? So in this case, the other thread is going to be in the pause mode, or you can say in the halt mode, means they cannot simply continue their execution concurrently, right? Simultaneously, the other thread execution is not happening. What is my requirement is, my requirement, I'm going to execute thread 1 in the debugging mode, but I don't want the thread to be in the halt state. Simultaneously or concurrently, thread 2 should continue its execution in the background, but not in the debugging mode. Debugging mode means only thread 1. Understand my point? Guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So in that case, what we need to do is, we need to use conditional threading, right? Conditional threading, what we need to use. How to use conditional threading? It's very straightforward, right? So it's very straightforward. Okay, let me show you. So you can see I'm having two threads. One is thread 1, another is thread 2. And I want this method to be executed in the debugging mode by only this thread, not by using this thread. If that is the scenario, you need to go for conditional debugging. So what you need to do is right click, and here you can see one option, that is conditions, right? You can right click on here. You can see one condition, click on the condition, and the condition here is true. Condition expression should be true, and here you need to write the condition. Condition is that system.threading that thread dot current thread dot name equals to thread 1, right? If the thread name which is currently executing the method is thread 1, then only debug this method. Otherwise, don't debug. Now, with these changes, right? With these changes, two threads are going to execute my sum method code, right? This two thread is going to execute my sum method code, right? Apart from this two thread, one of the thread name is thread 1, other thread name is thread 2. Then if the current thread name is thread 1, then only debug this application. If the current thread name is thread 2, then execute this method concurrently, but don't debug the application. Is that clear? Guys?
Can you come back on this once again, please?
Yeah, okay, let me, right? Suppose you want to debug this method. So currently, if I'm starting this two thread, if I'm starting this method, right? So how many thread are going to execute your application? One thread whose name is thread 1, another thread which is going to execute the application whose name is thread 2, right? And if you want to check which thread is currently executing your application, then how you can do this? Console.writeLine, right? So how you can get the name of the currently executing thread? Thread dot current thread dot name. This is going to print the currently executing thread name or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
And this thread belongs to which namespace? This thread class belongs to which namespace? System.threading namespace. That means the fully qualified, you can also write like this. So this statement is going to give you the name of the thread which is currently executing your application code. Sometimes it is going to be thread 1, and sometimes it is going to be thread 2, right? Now, what is my requirement? If the thread, if the thread name, if the currently executing thread is thread 1, then run the method in debugging mode, right? But if the thread name is, right, if the thread name is thread 2, then run the application, right? Then run the method, but not in debugging mode. Understand my question? Concurrently, both the thread is going to execute my sub method code, but I'm only interested to debug this method using this thread 1, but not using this thread 2. Understand my requirement? If I'm going with this option, if I'm going with this debug Windows debug, so currently the thread option is not showing, right? Currently, so if I start the application, right? If I start the application, if I start the application, if currently, see, in this case, thread 2 is debugging my application code. So at this time, thread 1 and main thread both are in the halt mode. They can't continue their execution concurrently or simultaneously. Once I'm debugging thread 2, simultaneously thread 1 will not execute, right? So if you don't want that scenario, I only want to debug thread 2 or I only want to debug thread 1, but simultaneously other threads should do their task. I don't want to halt other threads, right? Then in that case, this is your requirement. You want to execute both the thread simultaneously, but you want thread 1 to debug this application code, but you don't want this thread to debug your application code. Then in that case, what you need to do is you need to go with a conditional threading. So conditional threading means this is the statement I'm going to write. I'm just checking if the threading name, if the currently execute thread name is thread 1, then only execute this method in debugging mode. If the name is not thread 1, any other name, don't debug the application code, but only execute the application code, right? So if you want to do this, what you need to do is you just right click here, click on the condition option, right? Okay, let me do this once more. Click on this right click, and there is an option called condition. Click on the condition option. You can see condition expression. This should be evaluated to true, right? When now if this condition name equals to thread 1, and if this is true, right, you are writing the condition true, then only hit the debug point, right? That means in this case, for thread 1, this sum method is going to be executed in debugging mode. For thread 2, this sum method is going to be executed concurrently, but not in debugging mode. Understand?
Yes, yes, clear. Now it's clear.
Okay, now, and you can see when I'm using conditional debugging, the symbol is changed to like this. And
Yes.
once you move the mouse pointer, it will show you the condition. What condition? Now you have written the condition expression is that if the current thread name equals to thread 1, and if this condition is going to be true, then only the thread, only this debugger point is going to be hit, right? Now, okay, let me remove this statement because I'm not writing the debugging point here, right? Now let me run the application. Right, so you can click on this close button and you can see, right, this is the debugger. So currently which method is hitting?
Thread 1.
Thread 1. I continue the application. Again, I simply click on the continue button, and each time you will see, right, the thread 1 is going to be executed, right? Why I'm not getting this, right? So you can see the method is going to be executed by only thread 1, not thread 2, right? Is that clear? Okay, so why it is not hitting? Because I'm writing this statement, right? Let me remove this one. I'm running this application, right? I'm clicking on the click button. And if you want to make sure which the thread is currently executing your application code, click on the thread option. So the application execution is completed. Okay, fine. Right. Right. So thread 1, right? Which thread is going to execute your application code?
That's me.
Thread 1, because we have written the condition like this. Thread 1 is going to execute this application code. Right? So this is how you can use your conditional statement. If you are using this conditional statement, then only one thread, right? The thread, the condition, what you have written, that thread is going to execute your application code. Clear? How to use conditional debugging? Clear or not?
Yes.
Okay. The next important point or important topic that what we are going to discuss, we have already covered, right? We have already covered in the sense inter-thread communication, right? The inter-thread communication in the sense we have already discussed the wait and pulse method of the monitor class, right? In monitor class, if you look at our monitor class content, right, then you will see that we have already discussed this wait and pulse method, and we have already discussed one example of this inter-thread communication also. Yeah, you have seen I'm having two threads, so one thread executing the even number, another thread is executing the odd number, right? It once it executes some even number, it will notify other threads to execute. Once other thread completes, then again it will notify the event thread. So, and we have discussed using this false method, we can give the signal to other thread, be ready to execute the application code. And when we invoke the monitor method, right, wait method, then it will make the current thread to be in block state, which allows the other thread to execute the application code. So by using this monitor class, pulse and wait method, we can implement inter-thread communication in .NET framework, right? The same thing we are also going to discuss. So what is what we are going to discuss? We are going to discuss one example, right? In this example, what we are going to print is we are going to print the table, right? Table of 4 and table of 5. What is our requirement? Our requirement is main method is going to print the table 5 using a loop, and the other method what we are going to create a print table, right? That method is going to print the table 4. But what is our requirement? We need to print the table in ascending order. Ascending order means first table 4 should be printed on the console, then only table 5 is going to be printed on the console, right? That is what we are going to discuss, right? So in this case, as you can see in this case, this is my printable method, right? Both the object, this is my log object, and this log object is going to be shared by main thread. So here I'm writing the log object. Log object means which thread is locking this object, main thread or not. And the same log object I'm writing here means which thread is going to lock this object means the thread which is going to execute this printable, and which method is going, which thread is going to execute this printable, this manual thread, right? This manual thread, and this is my main thread, right? This is nothing but your main method execution means main thread. So main thread locking this lock object, and the manual thread is also locking this lock object. Why we are locking this lock object? Because we do not want to make any confusion. We want to print the table, and once one table is printed, then only the next table is going to be printed. This is the reason why I'm locking the I'm using the same lock object using both the threads. So in this case, you can see the code is very straightforward. Here I'm creating one thread class instance, calling the start method. I'm locking the lock object so that only one thread can use. So when I'm using this lock object, means only one thread can use this lock object at any given point of time. Currently, if main thread is locking this object, means if you are using the same lock object in other thread, that means they have to wait. They have to wait till the main thread release the lock on this locked object, right? So here you can see I'm getting the thread name, right? Current thread instance I'm getting here. I'm setting the name as a main thread, and I'm just running and printing the table of 5. How to print the table of 5? Very simple, and it's very straightforward. From I will 1, I will go up to less than equal to 10, and each time I'm just multiplying the value of 5 with I. So 5 into 1, 5 into 2, 5 into 3, right? That is what it is going to display. And this print table, it is going to print the table of 4. The same logic I have also written here, but instead of 5, I'm doing here with the application 4, right? And here I'm also printing the current thread name. And in this case, I do not need to set the name like this, because while creating the thread, I'm setting the name, right? But what is our requirement? Our requirement is, first of all, I need to print the table 4, and then only I need to print the table 5, right? So in this case, if you go and run the application, then you will see the order is not there. First, it is printing the table of 5, then it is printing the table of 4. So what my requirement is, now my requirement is this main thread should notify this child thread print table to print and complete its task. Once the child thread complete its task, it will send a signal to the main thread that main thread can continue its execution, right? So how we can do this? So we know that, right? So there is a class called the monitor. Okay, monitor dot, which method is there? False method. Monitor dot false, and to this false method, what I'm passing, this lock object. If I'm passing this lock object, means what? The other thread which is using this lock object, it will inform that thread to be ready to execute its task, right? And then what method I need to call here? I need to call the wait method, right? Once I call the wait method, right, by passing the lock object, then what he will do in this statement, it will send the signal. It will send or notify other threads, right? And in this case, it will block them. Okay, it will block the main thread till it gets the signal, till it gets the signal, right? So this two statement I have written here, right? So in this case, I'm notifying or I'm sending a signal to other threads which is using this lock object to be ready to continue its execution. And as soon as I invoke the wait method, it will block the main thread, and it will block till it gets the signal. Then this printable method will continue, will start its execution, right? This printable is going to print the table, but after printing the table, so what we need to do is we need to call which method? Monitor dot false method, right? We need to call the monitor dot false method, and to this false method I need to pass this one. And in this case, I do not need to call the wait method. Why? Because this method execution is completed, and I do not want this method to wait for I don't want this method to be wait further. So I'm not going to call the wait method. But once this method is completed, right? Once this method execution is completed, means the lock which is held by this method, right, is going to be released, right? So this is the lock statement, right? Once this method execution is started here, and once this lock object completed here, then the lock object which is held by this thread, right, it is going to be released automatically. And then I'm just informing the other thread, right? Other thread, in this case, the main thread, which is using this log object to continue, be ready with to continue its execution, right? And in this case, you can see the lock is released and we are notifying the other thread, the main thread, to continue its execution. So the main thread, from where it is halt, from there it is going to start its execution. So this statement are going to be executed. So in this case, you can see by using this false and wait method, we are notifying other thread to be ready and continue your task. And by using this false method, once the execution of this thread completed, it is sending a signal to the main thread so that the main thread will continue its execution. But guys, remember, if I'm not sending the signal, right, even though I'm releasing the log, but I'm not sending the signal, then it will not get the signal, right? It will not get the signal means this main thread will be there in the waiting state forever. This statement, what we are written here, they are never going to be executed. Let me run this fast. Okay, see, only table 4 is printed, but table 5 is not yet printed because you are called the wait method. This thread is going to be in waiting mode or blocked state, and this thread will be blocked until it gets the signal. So in this case, how you will it will get the signal? The other thread need to call the false method. See, in this case, if I'm not calling this false method, right? If I'm not calling this false method, right, then what will happen? Do you think that this table is going to be printed? Right? What object synchronization called an unsynchronized block, right? So you can see this is the issue, right? So first of all, you need to make this method to be false, right? So that it is going to send the signal, right? And then you need to call this false method, right? So now I'm uncommenting this, and with these changes in place, now if you will run the application, why I'm getting this error? Okay, okay, sorry. The issue is we have to call this within the log. Here we need to call this one because the log is completed here only. So here we need to call this one, right? So now run the application and you will get the output as expected. So here we are getting output of 4 table followed by the 5 table. So this is how inter-thread communication is worked, and we have already discussed this thing in our monitor class, right? So there is a method called false and wait, and using this false and wait method, you can send signal to other thread so that other thread can continue its execution while the calling thread will be there in the waiting state or block state. As long as it gets the signal, again it will going to be ready to work its task, right? So this is how inter-thread communication is going to be work in .NET framework. So this is all about multi-threading, right? And we have covered what we supposed to be covered in multi-threading. Any question from anyone? Guys? Any question from anyone?
No question, sir.
Bhargav, any question from you?
No, sir, no question.
Okay. Okay. So in our next session, we are going to start our new concept called collection framework. So before collection framework, few small concepts are there, but we are pushing them further. And once collection framework, asynchronous programming and parallel programming completed, then only we will come back to this and we will continue this one. Right? So these two we are going to discuss later. Before that, we need to complete this collection framework because this is important. Once collection, asynchronous and parallel programming completed, Then I will come back to these two informations, right? So collection means we'll discuss everything in the sense what is there in our traditional programming languages like C and C++. You might be heard array. So we will discuss what is array. We'll discuss what is two-dimensional, one-dimensional array. We'll discuss the advantages and the disadvantages of array. Once you understand the advantages and disadvantages of array, then we will understand how we will overcome the disadvantages of array using collection framework. In collection framework, we have different types of collection. We'll understand what are non-generic collections, right? Then we'll understand what is the advantages and the disadvantages of non-generic collection and how we can overcome the disadvantages of non-generic collection using generic collections, right? Then we'll understand what exactly generic is, right? So once you understand the generic collection, right, then we will understand what is the problem with generic collection and how we can overcome those problems using concurrent collection, right? Concurrent collection, then we'll understand the classes which are provided by the .NET framework to handle concurrent collection. So basically, we are going to discuss these 33 chapters in collection framework, right? Anyone, if any question from anyone, they can ask you. Otherwise, you can stop today's session.
No question, sir.
Okay, fine. That's it for today. We'll see tomorrow.